Today, I want to talk about how there's at least $1.2 trillion in hidden losses at these major banks. And I want to explain what will happen to these banks when they have to realise even just some of these trillions in losses. So stay tuned and let's make some money. We also had two absolutely crazy plays in the Millionaire Mindset trading group today, one running 190% and the other running 140%. But I'll touch on those in more detail a little later in the video. And now I'll dive straight in with the key information. So, Frank tweeted saying once a $3 trillion asset class, offices now are probably worth just $1.8 trillion, said Sternlicht, the chief executive officer of Starwood Capital Group. He said there's $1.2 trillion of losses spread somewhere, and nobody knows exactly where it all is. Now, so first, let's explain what's actually going on with these offices, exactly how $1.2 trillion of losses has come to fruition, whether it's realised or unrealised, and whereabouts it actually is. Well, as a result of the commercial real estate collapse over the last few years, due to effectively the work from home movement, offices have now decreased in value significantly, down from $3 trillion to $1.8 trillion. Now that's obviously a $1.2 trillion loss that many companies are going to have to realise on their books at some point, but so far those are unrealised losses. But so what are these unrealised losses and how does it differ between the property value and the loan value? Well, obviously there's many companies out there that own these offices. On their books they had these offices valued at $3 trillion and now they need to decrease those values to $1.8 trillion. But there's obviously many banks out there that provided the financing on these offices as well, provided the loans. But obviously, as these offices have decreased in value so significantly, many property companies are actually defaulting on their loans. We've seen articles over the last year or two of big giant property companies defaulting on hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars worth of property loans. And obviously when the default occurs, those unrealised losses turn to realised losses for those banks and they have to recognise them in their books. But what the CEO of Starwood Capital is saying is there's $1.2 trillion of losses spread somewhere, but nobody knows exactly where it is. Now the banks have started to realise some of the unrealised losses, but yet so far haven't recognised too many of the realised losses. Obviously, I've shown you many articles like this over the last few months of these banks with major unrealised losses, now tipping the scales at around $684 billion. But hang on, isn't that number supposed to be 1.2 trillion of losses total? Why are they only recognising unrealised losses of 684 billion so far? Where's the rest? Well, that's exactly what the CEO of Starwood Capital is getting at. There is $1.2 trillion in losses, but they're spread somewhere, but nobody knows exactly where all of it is. Maybe he's hinting that banks actually haven't recognised all of these losses related to the commercial real estate sector. Maybe there's more they need to realise, or maybe there's some they've already realised that they're just trying to hide. Regardless of where those losses actually are, these banks are currently sitting on nearly $700 billion worth of losses. And that, supposedly, as Planet of the Apes has tweeted, is the smart money with nearly $700 billion of losses. And as Chris added, he said, if you don't know your impact, here's the proof. He said, if you don't know if they'd sell you a share regardless of if it's available or not, or can be located or not, here's the proof. He said every single share bought is a handful of dirt that lowers the grave we force them to dig for themselves. Because obviously every single share sold to us or every single share shorted to us is a liability they later have to cover. And so far these liabilities are stacking up in all corners of these banks, it seems, with nearly $700 billion in total unrealised losses. Now today we had two colossal trades in the Millionaire Mindset trading group. The first was Remark Holdings, which we alerted at 50 cents, again at 79 cents, and again around $1.02. Obviously that ran for a total of 191%, and if you got in on the second breakout, it would have still ran for 85% gains. Now on top of that, we also had Nexi, which ran for 140%. and Jamin locked in 60% gains. We also had Night Chaos locking in 75% gains on Tesla, and Moses locking in around $570. So guys, be sure to join the Millionaire Mindset Trading Group using the link in the description below, ready for the start of February, so we can make some brilliant plays together. And remember the 100% guaranteed refund policy if you don't make a singular profitable trade in 30 days. With the new website, you won't be rebilled at the start of the month. You won't be rebilled until the very end of February. So guys, be sure to join today using the link in the description below. Now, in my video yesterday, I touched on Evergrande and the potential fallout from Evergrande and exactly which banks and which hedge funds may be taking on losses. I said we first need to wait for those banks and hedge funds to announce how much losses they've taken on before we can judge the market impact. And Luis has given us this screenshot from Boss Blunts of exactly which banks and hedge funds are holding Evergrande debt. So big holders of the debt are BlackRock, Ashmore Group, UBS, which is a really interesting one, Prudential PLC, Allianz, and many others. Now, obviously, UBS is very interesting because they've just taken on tons of toxic positions from Credit Suisse. And as Gold Telegraph has tweeted, they've said funds from UBS, among others, are reported to have some of the highest exposure to Evergrande over the past 12 months. So it'll be very interesting to see how big of a loss UBS announces and how that impacts the bank. Obviously, UBS recently took over Credit Suisse, took on some massive losses, had to pay some giant fines as well, and I think UBS are also struggling as a result, especially as they're still holding many of those toxic Credit Suisse liabilities, like the toxic total return swaps. Depending on how much of a loss they take on from Evergrande, whether it's a few $100 million, a few billion, or tens of billions, we could also see UBS collapsing too. But obviously first, what we need to wait for is we need to wait for UBS to announce how much of a loss they've taken on, and then obviously to estimate just how screwed UBS really are. Because you can see from this screenshot here, from this Google search, it says UBS took over its rival Credit Suisse in a state-orchestrated rescue last year, creating a bank with a balance sheet of more than $1.6 trillion, nearly twice the size of the Swiss economy. So if UBS does end up in trouble as a result of these toxic derivatives, toxic total return swaps, and Evergrande losses, who on earth out there is big enough to take them over? Obviously, Citadel is big, sure, but don't forget Citadel only has around $400 billion worth of total assets. So Citadel is like 1/5 the size of UBS. I think the only bank big enough to take over UBS in a collapse event would be JP Morgan. But again, that would be a massive, massive portion of JP Morgan's assets. So if UBS does end up taking on some significant Evergrande losses, it could pretty much be game over for the financial system. Now, Frank has also tweeted about the SEC charging Morgan Stanley and Pau Passi for the recent fraud. Now, obviously, this was a multi-year fraud involving the disclosure of confidential information about the sale of large quantities of stocks. Now, obviously, I'm going to skip out the majority of this article because there's only really one part that interested me, or the failure of the part that interested me, which was the fines. So you'd think for a firm and for a specific high-ranking person that's been caught committing securities fraud, the only answer would be a fairly lengthy prison sentence. But so far, the SEC has only levied a fine on Morgan Stanley of $138 million and a fine on Pau Passi of $250,000. Now, I guess the SEC can only implement civil penalties and not criminal proceedings, so I guess we'll have to see if this case goes any further. But $250,000 for a multi-year fraud for a high-ranking individual is literally pocket change. For a high-ranking individual that likely makes multiple millions of dollars per year as an individual, not even as a company, being fined $250,000 is like a month's salary. As I said, we'll have to wait to see if he ends up with a big prison sentence, whether it's 5, 10, 15 or 20 years, or whether it just gets brushed under the rug. But it really shows how lenient the SEC is being towards these criminals and how they pretty much have to help them and bail them out and have had to do so for the last couple of years. Likely because without the SEC's help, many of these hedge funds, market makers and institutions would have gone bankrupt and the squeeze would have happened long ago. So guys, be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. And as always guys, be sure to ding that notification bell, because that way you'll be alerted when I upload a new video. Cheers.